into their fortifications in Kingston, they took the next logical leap to stone. Thankfully, building with stone is quite easy in Kingston. We're called the Limestone City because we sit on a huge bedrock of this beautiful blue limestone. You'll see when we head back into downtown that many of our public and private buildings are constructed of this material. One of the first major constructions right here in the city was the new and improved Fort Henry. So not only is it built of stone, but it utilized some revolutionary fortification building techniques of the day. Earlier forts would look like the citadels in Quebec or Halifax, or indeed like our own Fort Frontenac, that ruined wall I showed you that had those very sharp angles. It looked like a spear point sticking out from the fort itself. All of that is gone in this brand new fortification design. Instead of being built up on top of the hill, where you require those levels of defense to avoid soldiers getting closer and closer and closer to your fort, Fort Henry was built down into the hill. That's why it looks quite short from the outside. You could imagine it being 6 or 7 feet tall. These walls are actually about 40 feet tall. The entire fort is surrounded by a deep ditch called the Dry Ditch, and there's only one proper entrance. There's only one place that you can get into the fort without falling 30 feet down. And of course, that area is protected by a crossfire of rifles and artillery pieces. In fact, the entire ditch is so protected, so even if you did fall into the fort, somehow manage to survive and not break an ankle and be ready to fight, well, there are 302 little slits carved into the stone called rifle loopholes all the way around there that make sure there's nowhere you can hide. It's an impressive use of geometry to make sure that every possible angle of the fort is covered. The last feature that I'll show you, as we're coming up, you can see that there's an angle at the very top of the walls, and that angle continues all the way down the slope of the hill. Come and do a little bit of a turn here. It's very easy now to see out the right-hand side, but that angle just continues all the way down. This means that a defender standing on top of the fort can rest their arms on that angle and fire their rifle straight down the hill. Someone trying to attack the fort, particularly with artillery, if they fire in a straight line, they miss completely. They have to try to point their weaponry down, which is not something the Victorian artillery was designed to do. Now, of course, you can see that Fort Henry's all set up for their Lumina Borealis. This is their big winter-themed event. So if you want to see a really spectacular light and sound and multimedia entertainment show, come to Lumina Borealis. You can walk through on your own, and there's all kinds of different things that will react to what you do as you walk through the fort. You can also see that Fort Henry Hill is often used as a sledding ground. However, this is not something that is traditionally allowed. So these people are sneaking around, sledding down the hill. They would certainly be told not to if there were any officials out here. We have unfortunately had several deaths on this hill, primarily cadets from the Royal Military College who came up here maybe after having a few too many drinks and ended up hitting one of those trees at a very high rate of speed. Now we're going to head back down into the city. Before we do, we'll pass by again some very modern construction and some, I think you could safely call it boring construction. They're called PMQs, private married quarters. They exist all throughout Canada on military bases, and in this case it's here at our Canadian Forces Base Kingston. So this is the start of the base here along this ridge. These homes can be effectively rented out by service members. They used to be available only to married members. Now a single service member could theoretically live in one of these houses, but there's a really long waiting list if you don't have a family that needs a home to live in. So as I said, we're going to head back down the hill and right back into the heart of downtown Kingston. We're going to be crossing over the mouth of the Rideau Canal once again. Now, maybe for you coming from Ottawa, this is going to be boring and old information, but I need to tell my story about the Rideau Canal anyway, because I think it's one of the most important stories to happen, not just to Kingston or to Ottawa or southeastern Ontario, but in all of Canada. See, before the Rideau Canal was built, if you wanted to get supplies into Upper Canada, into this new nation, you had to use the St. Lawrence River. It was full of waterfalls and rapids, and directly on the other side, the United States of America. If there had been another military action between Great Britain and the United States, the U.S. could have blockaded the river and entirely cut off supplies into Upper Canada. Even without a blockade, they could have set up shore batteries and and simply fired on any ships that were trying to sail down the river. It would have been a very tough situation. So the British government instead appointed Lieutenant Colonel John By of the Royal Engineers to build an inland canal and to bypass the St. Lawrence in that narrow and dangerous zone. So the first thing that Lieutenant Colonel By did is he built himself a town, a place where his workers could live, where they could receive supplies through, where they could begin this labor. He called it Bytown. Of course, today it's known as Ottawa and has become our nation's capital. And from there, he carved this canal down here to Kingston, a monumental engineering achievement. And if you haven't had a chance to see a lock station on the Rideau Canal, they're a little bit less exciting this time of year, certainly in the summer. Go to Kingston Mills, go to Jafie's Locks, go somewhere along the Rideau Canal and watch these locks in action. They still operate the way that they did more than 100 years ago. Gates open up by hand cranks. They're these huge hewn blocks of limestone that make up all of these locks along the canal. And you would think that with such a massive achievement, that Lieutenant Colonel By would be everybody's favorite person throughout the British Empire. But in fact, by some accounts, the day that he opened the canal, the day he was sailing down it on his inaugural trip, there was a scribe in London writing a letter for him. Not a pleasant letter. It was one that relieved him of his command here in Kingston, that recalled him back to England, and that had him facing charges that would eventually lead to his early retirement. You see, when he started to plan the Rideau Canal, he told the British government it would cost about £422,000. By the time he finished 6 years later, he had spent £877,000. So when you more than double your budget, at that point people start asking questions, and they wondered if maybe he was somehow embezzling these extra funds. Now it's worth noting that he was found not guilty of all of these charges. He hadn't done anything wrong. The construction just ended up being a lot more expensive than initially thought. Nevertheless, it was pretty well the last we hear in history of Lieutenant Colonel By's achievements. Once again, we'll pass over this LaSalle Causeway, and there's a green bridge at the center of it. This whole thing was built to replace a simple wooden bridge that used to be called the Cataract Way or the Penny Bridge, because of the 1 penny toll there used to be to get across it. But the green bridge at the center of the causeway is the most important part of this construction because it lifts up to allow boats to pass through. It was designed by Joseph Strauss, the same engineer who designed the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And it actually has a sister bridge in Canada in Victoria, British Columbia, called the Johnson Street Bridge, or quite simply the Blue Bridge, since theirs is painted blue. We like to call ours the Singing Bridge. I'm sure you can understand why. Alright, so now we're getting right back into the core of Kingston. I'm going to tell you about one of the most significant events in the entire city's history. I told you we had that major limestone construction of Fort Henry, of course the Rideau Canal being built of limestone as well. This left us with a lot of laborers in the city who knew how to work with this beautiful stone, a lot of Scottish stonemasons who were dreaming of the things that they could build with it, and a lot of local architects started to flood into Kingston because rumor had it we were about to be made the capital of a brand new British province. And then disaster struck. In April of 1840, a huge fire broke out, first in a warehouse in downtown Kingston, but it quickly spread by our city's very heavy winds. At that time, most of the downtown was little log cabins and nothing much more. By the morning of April 18th in 1840, there wasn't a Kingston anymore. Almost the entire town burned to the ground. When the rebuilding efforts started up, the mayor decided that no wooden structures would be allowed to be built in downtown Kingston any longer, and that existing wooden structures couldn't be insured. And this began our limestone revolution. We had the stone, we had the workers, we had the architects, and now we had a sheer absence of buildings. So all of these beautiful limestone structures started to be built throughout the city. That's what we're really going to see as we get into the heart of our historic downtown. Now the first building is one that you, Donna, were asking about at the beginning. This is our City Hall right up ahead with this beautiful neoclassical dome. And it's right for you to look at this building and ask this question. because a little British colony from the 1840s shouldn't have a city hall that looks like this. Municipal government was not a big deal, but we had just been named the capital of the new United Province of Canada, and the city wanted to show off by building this magnificent city hall. The wing here at the back of City Hall used to extend all the way out to the roadway. It was called the Market Shambles, and it encompassed part of our historic Market Square that you can still see over to the left-hand side. And because municipal government was not as big a deal in the 19th century, City Hall was also built to be a post office and a police station and holding cells for, minor infractions, as well as some business space and even some residential space to help house some of the citizens of Kingston who were left without a home in that fire of 1840. So it was a huge multi-purpose space, and it was built right down here, the hub of everything that happened in Kingston, our Market Square. This is Canada's oldest continuously operating farmers market. It has been in operation since 1801. In the summertime, you'll still see lots of farmers out selling their wares. In fact, even now in February, in the middle of FebFest, you can see a few of them out there primarily selling, easily preserved things like maple syrup and honey. All the buildings around here were major buildings that had to do with the daily operation of Kingston. We have the Masonic buildings to our right, where the Freemasons used to meet. Of course, when you bring in a lot of Masons from Scotland, you end up with a lot of members of the Scottish Rite, or the Society of Freemasons. And then this beautiful red brick building that's now the Keg Steakhouse was built for the British Whig, today called the Whig Standard. That's Canada's oldest daily news publication. They're still in publication today, although their offices have moved. Look here at Customs House. These pillars in front of Customs House are made from single blocks of blue limestone. So they're not made up of bricks. It's a huge, extensive process to carry those huge blocks here to downtown Kingston to build Customs House. And of course we have St. George's Cathedral. This is another building that was claimed by multiple fires throughout its history, kept being rebuilt bigger and better. It's really important to have an Anglican cathedral in a British colony, because it's one of the little ticks in the box to be able to say, yes, you're not a town, but now a city. Here we have the oldest residential district of the city coming along King Street. You'll still see some beautiful blue limestone, but also lots of beautiful red brick. A lot of the homes will have arched entryways that lead in towards the back, where there'd be a little square green space that would be shared amongst the residents of a city block. And it's also where you would often keep your carriage houses and your stables. These little mews would allow you to lead your horse into the back of the house, or just lead yourself into the back of the house. Now keep looking out your window to the left-hand side. There's a really interesting feature on this next red brick building. You can see some bricks that have been intentionally misaligned in order to create an effect called rustication. So that's a really neat architectural technique you see on some of the more fancy red brick buildings, and it's very simple. You just have to shift the orientation of some of those bricks. It really does cause the building to pop. So the reason you see so many lavish buildings around here is that we didn't really have a lower class in downtown Kingston after 1840. You remember the mayor said you couldn't even insure the old wooden buildings downtown anymore, and so the people who couldn't afford these beautiful red brick structures ended up leaving the city limits and living on the outskirts of town in some rough and tumble little suburbs that we'll go through a bit later. But down here by the water, you see some of the most wealthy merchants, the mariners, the shipwrights that were making a fortune with Kingston being this shipping hub, and we're starting to build these incredible structures. This one coming up next, this limestone one, has some of the most impressive ironwork, decorative ironwork in the entire city, and most of that is original to its 1840s building date. You see some really beautiful carpentry work coming up on some of these homes as well. So this is where you go if you want to see the real finer details in some elaborate Victorian architecture, because some Victorian architecture can be a little bit plain and frankly a little bit boring. It's not the case with these waterfront homes. And we are coming up on the fourth and final of our Martello Towers. This one is called Murney Tower. It's got a good name story as well. The British wanted it named Murney Murray Tower after a British military captain, but the Murney family owned the land. The locals defiantly misspelled Murray as Murney many times on paperwork until the tower more or less officially became known as Murney Tower. Over to the right-hand side, this is our largest and our oldest hospital. Kingston General Hospital. It was built in 1835. We'll see the historic side of this building in just a little while. So right now we're just passing by the modern extensions that have been built onto the historic structure. I hope that during your time here you don't need to be here, but that is the big emergency room right up that ramp along King Street. So hopefully you never need to use that ramp, but if you do, at least now you know where it is. This elaborate looking building to the left is the heating plant for the hospital, so they just have underground pipes that carry the heated steam or heated water over into the hospital itself. And now we're coming across, this is not quite architecture, but it's still a man-made project. This park here to our left was built in the 1960s. They were building an underground parking lot at Queen's University, and as they excavated dirt to build a parking lot, they dumped it here in the lake to create a park. So there used to just be a little breakwater, just a bunch of rocks out in the water, and then they filled in the area between the breakwater and the shore and called it Breakwater Park. And at the center of the park, there's a sculpture. I'm going to try my best to pronounce the artist's name. I believe it was Koso Elul. He was a Russian artist who built this sculpture that he called Time. And it's made of an aluminum alloy. It was custom made here at the local Alcan factory for the sculpture. Nobody knows why it's called Time. There was a rumor that the two sides were supposed to touch in the year 2000, that they had been built on a fault line or something to that effect. It's completely untrue. They're as far apart as they've ever been, so it still remains up to everyone's imagination why that particular sculpture is called Time and what the artist was trying to evoke. Alright, so we're pretty well past historic city limits now. We're well within the city of Kingston by a modern map, but in the 19th century, you'd be well out into the country right now. And this is where some enterprising people started to come up with residential and business ideas. So you're going to see a row of cottages coming up to the right-hand side. They were built by a merchant named Charles Hales, and he had the idea of renting these out to some government officials. Of course, the capital later moved to Montreal, then Quebec City, then Toronto, then Quebec City, then Montreal, then Ottawa. So the government didn't get much use out of them. But behind this limestone wall, you'll still see those beautiful Hales cottages. And this is also where you'll start to see one of the big architectural shifts that happened all throughout the British Empire from 1840 to about 1850. And suddenly you have buildings that are only meant to be a residential building, not meant to be a residence and a store all at the same time. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we come down to the heart of downtown Kingston. Over to our left, two art centers. The Tet Center for Creativity and Learning and the Isabel Bader Center for the Performing Arts. They're built out of structures that used to belong to James Morton's Mammoth Brewery and Distillery. And Mr. Morton himself lived at a beautiful mansion right beside the brewery that he called Mortonwood. He purchased it from our first mayor, Thomas Kirkpatrick. You can see that sort of red and gold mansion over to our left. And later on the same property, this historic St. Helens property, a place called Stone Gables was built in the very early 20th century. This now officially belongs to Corrections Canada. And speaking of Corrections Canada, in just a moment we're going to drive past Canada's oldest maximum security penitentiary facility, Kingston Penitentiary. Like the hospital, it was opened in 1835. This one is no longer in operation. It was decommissioned in 2013. There are no inmates being kept there any longer. In fact, there are tours that are held there throughout the summer. Really incredible tours if you happen to come back and want to take a look inside the penitentiary. We can't see much of the architecture from outside, but the cell block is built into a really simple cruciform shape. Of course, Christianity being the dominant religion when this penitentiary was built, they felt that the shape of the cross would help make these prisoners be more penitent, reform. There's also some really impressive brickwork in one of the old workshops. These big vaulted ceilings that were used to hold aloft a metal foundry that was on an upper level. So if you're back in Kingston in the summer, I highly recommend taking a tour of Kingston Penitentiary. And now we're coming into Portsmouth Village. Now today it's not really a village. This is still Kingston. It was amalgamated into the city in 1962. Before then it was its own little municipality settled in 1784 by United Empire Loyalists. Those were people who were loyal to the British Crown and they wanted to leave the United States after the United States left Great Britain. So they were given grants of land, they came up here to Canada, they started new lives, and one of the places they settled was here at Portsmouth Village. I want you to look to this red brick building coming up to the right-hand side. It's divided into a few apartments now, but it was built as a single home, and yet you can see 3 chimneys. This is one of the problems with a Victorian home in a North American colony. It gets really, really cold in the winter, and if you have a big home with lots of rooms, one fireplace isn't going to cut it. So many of these Victorian homes were built with 3, 4, 5, 6 fireplaces just to try to keep the house warm. And poorer families who were not able to keep multiple fireplaces lit throughout the winter would be forced to close off entire sections, entire rooms of the house. They board up the door, they put heavy blankets over to keep a draft out, and try to just keep a central area heated. So you can imagine, especially if you were, let's say, the youngest child in a poor Victorian family, you may well lose your bedroom all winter long because your family just couldn't afford to keep it warm. So guess what? You're going to sleep at the foot of mom and dad's bed because maybe that's where the wood stove is sitting. Portsmouth Olympic Harbour, I will talk about the harbour in a second. Let's start with Portsmouth Village here. The residents here gave the city its name. They wanted to show their allegiance to King George, so they started to refer to that old French trading post and fort out there at Fort Frontenac as the King's Town. That was their little way of saying, we're the King's men and that's the King's Town. Within about a year, they decided that was too much of a mouthful and had it shortened down to Kingston. Now we'll talk about Portsmouth Olympic Harbour now that we're through this intersection and can actually see it. It was built for the 1976 Summer Olympic Games. I don't expect either of you to remember this far back, but in 1976 the Olympics were held in Montreal. Almost all of the sailing events were diverted here to Kingston at Portsmouth Olympic Harbour. There's a sculpture down at the end of the harbour called Tetra. The Tetra used to house the Olympic flame. Now the reason Kingston was chosen for these sailing events, I did allude to us being a fairly windy city before. We're in fact the freshwater sailing capital of the world. We have windy days way more often than still days here in Kingston, so it's great sailing weather, in fact, all year long. You wouldn't think it because the lake freezes over, sometimes on Lake Ontario when it's very solidly frozen, and often at Colonel By Lake, which is just north of the main part of the city, you have ice boat races. People have these specialized boats, and it's kind of like a luge and a sailboat and maybe a little bit like skating all at the same time. So the boat just rests on the ice. It has sort of blades or runners that go along the ice, and you put up your sail just like you would as a sailboat and go cruising around the ice. Of course, the difference between ice boating and normal sailboating is that in an ice boat it hurts a whole lot more if you happen to fall out. There's a beautiful house over here to the left-hand side. This used to be the warden's house for Kingston Penitentiary. And it was built with approval of Prime Minister John A. Macdonald in the 1890s. Prior to that, the warden actually lived in apartments inside the penitentiary. And I'm sure that the warden, John Crichton, really appreciated the Prime Minister's decision to build this home because he was a warden that had 5 children. So imagine trying to raise 5 children inside a penitentiary. I'm sure he was quite grateful to have a house instead. And today that is Canada's Penitentiary Museum, so another great spot to visit if you're back in Kingston over the summer. They're open entirely by donation. It's an incredible place. Right next to it is the old prison for women. So this was built to accommodate the female prisoners that used to be held with the male prisoners at Kingston Penitentiary. Closed during the year 2000 amid some serious controversy. It used to be owned by Queen's University, but as you can see from the for sale signs, they're trying to get rid of it. So if you want to own an old prison, now's the time to talk to Queen's and find out how much they want for this historic building at 8-acre lot. The Queen's actually bought up a few historic structures in this area. This became their West Campus, and one of them is my favorite building on the whole tour route. You wouldn't believe it if you just heard the name. It's called the Donald Gordon Conference Center. Sounds about as boring as a building gets. But when it was first built, it was called the Rose Lawn. And it was a beautiful country home on a massive estate. And you can tell how big the mansion was because it was later converted to a conference center rather than, a bed and breakfast or something normal size. You can look over and see the Rose Lawn, now the Donald Gordon Conference Center to our left. So a massive mansion. It looks like it only has 2 chimneys, but I guarantee you there's 4 or 5 chimneys coming out of each of those stone slabs at the top. huge, huge house. It also used to be used as a hunting lodge, which really tells you how much the landscape around here has changed. It used to be forests teeming with deer before it became known as the Western Liberties, one of the first Victorian experiments in suburban living. Now, one of the more prominent people to live out here was Sir John A. Macdonald. He lived in a home built by Charles Hales called Bellevue House. We won't be able to get there today because the street gets a little bit narrow in the winter time, and with this snow I don't want to end up skidding down into traffic. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. But the house is just down on Center Street here. It includes another house on Center Street called the Otterburn House, this yellow stucco one to our right-hand side. So these were some of the original houses that made up this suburban area. This place where wealthy merchants were suddenly building homes without a store at the bottom because their store was all the way in downtown Kingston and they were commuting into work every day. Doesn't sound very novel to us today, but this was a time without the automobile. You had to hire a horse and carriage to bring you into town and then back home every day. It's a bit of an expensive lifestyle. Now when we leave the Western Liberties, we're going to head into another old suburb, one of those rough and tumble suburbs that I told you about. It used to be known as Stewartsville. We'll talk about the nature of Stewartsville after I tell you what it is today. Today, it's the main campus for Queen's University. This is a beautiful campus. It's full of a lot of historic buildings, a lot of beautiful limestone and brick architecture, and then one building that the locals thought was an absolute eyesore when it was constructed. That's this hall up ahead called Macintosh Quarry, or just Mac Quarry Hall. Because it was made of poured concrete, the locals thought it was just an abomination. And it's also got a really unique bit of architecture inside. It's a hard building to navigate. There's lots of weird angles and corners and narrow staircases. And it has been suggested that it was built this way on purpose during the 1970s when riots were happening at university campuses. So the theory is that they built this so that it's almost impossible to congregate a huge group of people in one area, which makes it almost impossible for a full-blown riot to break out. To our left is the Stauffer Library. This is built in a modern Gothic style. So I'll talk about that Gothic architecture again, specifically to point this one out. This is built in a very modern style, but it's still inspired by that old medieval architecture. And you can contrast that with another library called the Douglas Library, which is on our left now, which is a Gothic Revival style building. And Gothic Revival is pretty much what you see when you're looking at Queen's University. This was Victorian architects trying their best to recapture the glory days of the High Middle Ages. And that's what you see when you're looking at Neo-Gothic, or Gothic Revival architecture, including things like Ontario Hall with its beautiful sweeping staircases, and the clock tower just up ahead at Grand Hall. Now across from Grand Hall, you'll see a red brick, what used to be a private home. Elaborate, but a very standard red brick private home. You can see modern extensions built all over it. This is now the Agnes Etherington Art Center. It's a very small art gallery attached to Queen's University, but believe it or not, they have 3 original Rembrandts on display inside that gallery. Very, very impressive for a small university art center. This is Banry Hall to the right. I don't point out Banry for any architectural value. I just really like the name. In Gaelic, the convention is that if you want to make something feminine, you simply add the word woman in front of it. So a king in Gaelic is called Rí, and a queen in Gaelic is just a woman king, and therefore called Ban Rí. So that is the Queen's Hall at Queen's University, and it used to be, of course, the women's dormitory here. I just think that's a nice way to name a facility. Now as we pass through Queen's University here, we're also going to pass by that historic building, or the historic face, of Kingston General Hospital. We'll be coming up on the right-hand side. It's very plain, very austere. It doesn't look like the kind of place you'd want to go to get better, but it was an incredible hospital for its era, and of course remains one today. This is the original historic building of Kingston General Hospital. And it's worth noting that because we were the capital of the United Province of Canada, that the first Parliament of Canada actually met inside this building on June 13th of 1841. because we never ended up having Parliament buildings built here in the city of Kingston. Over to the left, we see the Summerhill House. It was originally owned by the Archdeacon George O'Kill Stewart, for whom this neighborhood, Stewartsville, was named, and he, in that Palladial-style building, was the landlord. 1 second to cough here, and we'll continue this story. So he was the landlord, he lived on that mansion, but this area at the time was an absolute slum, because you couldn't build wooden buildings in the city. They were built here, and they were built shoddily, and the poorest of the poor lived out here in areas like Stewartsville, amid the slaughterhouses and tanneries, and all the other unpleasant aspects of civilized society. Of course, you don't see any of that today. Queens has completely restored the area, but if you look carefully around the neighborhood of Queens, you will see some old frame buildings that date back to the time when this was a slum known as Stewartsville. Everything that we're passing to the right-hand side is called City Park. And City Park is quite a large park here as far as Kingston standards go, and that's because it was a parcel of land completely set aside by the government. This is where the Parliament buildings were supposed to be built, back when we were the capital, before both of your cities stole it from us at one time or another. Thankfully, the construction project didn't start before government moved, so we don't have a giant empty building looking for a purpose. Instead, we have a beautiful public park that gets lots of use, especially throughout the summer months. Now coming around the corner, you'll see the Frontenac County Courthouse. It's still an active courthouse to this day. It thankfully no longer fulfills its other original purpose. This did used to be Kingston's town hanging ground. There's a gallows and a small cell block that used to be attached to the courthouse were torn down after Canada abolished capital punishment in the 1960s. Now looking at the Frontenac County Courthouse, we've seen a few other buildings like City Hall, like St. George's Cathedral, that roughly match this style. This is the other major architectural style we see in Kingston. So we had Neo-Gothic, this is called Neoclassical. So in Neo-Gothic, you had Victorian architects trying to reclaim the glory of the High Middle Ages, and here they are trying to reclaim the glory of the classical world, of ancient Greece and of ancient Rome. So what I really want to sum up with is that Victorian architects were the original hipsters. They didn't want anything to do with the era they lived in. They were always reaching back to try to find something they felt was a little bit more genuine. And I'll also give you a good architectural mystery. There's a dome up there at the Frontenac County Courthouse, and at the two other buildings I mentioned, St. George's Cathedral and Kingston City Hall. And if you want, when you go home, go to Google Maps, bring up the satellite image, and right-click on one of those domes. Right-click, measure distance. So you're going to have one point of your measuring tool right in the dome, say, of the courthouse. Put the other one at the dome of City Hall, and you'll see that the line perfectly intersects the dome of St. George's Cathedral. All three were built in a perfectly straight line. Nobody knows why. Here to the left-hand side is Kingston's only castle. This is a very unique building. A Scottish gentleman was trying to convince his family to move with him to Canada by giving them a castle to live in. He unfortunately went bankrupt before it was finished. Believe it or not, it's still used as a private residence to this day. The current residents have their entire house set up on the lower floor, and they leave the upper floors almost entirely for tours. Happen somewhat infrequently. What's unique about this house is that the inside matches the dimensions